First up, though, is our new lawsuit. The government is largely shut down. If you want anything done out of the federal government, unless they're doing something related to coronavirus, they're not doing anything at all. In fact, they've shut down their FOIA office in the FBI, which means we will get no documents from the FBI for the foreseeable future. We were also told last week, as I alerted you, that the State Department has also shut down its offices. So, at least its FOIA offices. And what's the excuse? Well, only these FOIA records can only be reviewed in secret enclaves, in secret facilities, secure facilities. So no one can go into work and review them, which doesn't make any sense to me, because being transparent is an essential government function, especially during this time period. So Joe Biden, who is now the presumptive nominee for the Supreme Court, for the Democratic presidential ticket, is being protected by the State Department's failure to process any FOIA requests, including those under litigation by Judicial Watch about his alleged corruption, at least as it relates to Ukraine and, very importantly, China. Because remember, the Chinese government gave his son significant backing during the Obama administration. Completely outrageous conflicts of interest, in addition to the whole Ukraine mess, which we have a number of lawsuits on. So all of that's been shut down. So Joe Biden is protected by the federal government's refusal to abide by the rule of law during the coronavirus crisis. And so, of course, in my view, it's not a crisis, but we'll get to that later. So I was beginning to say that I was making the point initially that even though everyone wants you to think nothing can be done to enforce the rule of law during this coronavirus, Judicial Watch is proving that wrong. We continue to do the heavy lifting during the coronavirus. Our legal team worked hard to pursue and file a new piece of litigation to make sure that your elections will be cleaner over the short, medium, and long term. We filed a new lawsuit against the state of North Carolina and certain counties in North Carolina over their failure to take reasonable steps to clean up their voting rolls. How do we know they haven't taken reasonable steps to clean up their voting rolls? Well, they've got 1 million inactive voters on the rolls. And typically speaking, an inactive voter is someone who hasn't voted for several presidential or general federal elections. And federal law requires that you remove them after a period of time. You send them a notice. If they don't respond or otherwise vote, over the course of 5 years, you got to respond. You got to remove them. So there's plenty of time if you're a voter who is registered but who hasn't been active, to get back to the state and let them know you still want to be registered. And of course, even if you are removed, you can re-register, just show up at the polls and say, I want to vote. That's the way it typically works. So no one's going to be denied their right to vote. But what will happen is that dirty names, more or less, would be removed if they were following the law. And what is the law? The National Voter Registration Act, which requires states to take these reasonable steps to clean up the rolls. And it's popularly known as the Motor Voter Bill because the left pushed it out to require everyone to register or be given the opportunity to register at DMVs, at any place where public benefits are dispensed. And so there was a concern that when you do that, you'll get double registrations, people improperly registering a vote and such. So the deal was that they would have a requirement that states take reasonable steps to clean up the rolls. Well, guess which part of the law was enforced and which part of the law wasn't enforced? Well, the left went to court to force registration, to force the states and localities to register voters, but no one wanted to enforce the part of the law requiring the states to clean up the list. Look, if you're eligible to vote, you have every right under the sun to register to vote, and you should exercise that right if you so choose to do so. Again, if you so choose to do so. But if you move away, or you die, or you reside in more than one state, or you're otherwise become ineligible to vote for other reasons, your name shouldn't be on the list, don't you think? and the state should take reasonable steps to take your name off the list. So if they send you a card and you don't respond, and then you don't respond, and then you don't vote in the next general election, and then you don't vote in the next general election against after that, that's as long as 5+ years, the states are supposed to take your names off the rolls. The Justice Department refused to enforce that part of the law, more or less, and thankfully there was a private right of action in the law, meaning that a group like Judicial Watch could come in and sue states to enforce the law. And we were the first private entity to file these lawsuits. We filed them beginning around 2012 against Indiana and Ohio. Indiana changed their law, so we were happy. So we ended the lawsuit. Ohio settled with us, so we were happy. We ended the lawsuit, and Ohio began the process of cleaning up the rolls. But the left was outraged at that, and they challenged the consequences of the settlement, and it was upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States in 2018. So the writing was on the wall that other states needed to enforce the rule of law here. And in California, where we had sued, both California and Los Angeles County, they settled with us. And Los Angeles County, as a result of our settlement, is removing up to 1.6 million names from their voter rolls. You heard that right, 1.6 million names. Now that process, as I described, will take potentially years, but because the process begins, it means that people, in theory, get removed almost immediately once the state finds out they're no longer eligible. Certainly that's the way it's supposed to work. And certainly if they're dead, they shouldn't be on the rolls at all, and that should be a no-brainer in terms of removal. So that's where we stood, and of course we had a case in Kentucky as well, which is going to result in the removal of at least 250,000 names from the rolls. And that was a result of a consent decree that the state of Kentucky entered into. And so we had found nationally, the first time we did a national analysis of this, there were 3.5 million extra names on the rolls. And so we pursued and pushed a bunch of states on that issue. And now, according to our 2019 analysis, there are 2.5 million names on the rolls who arguably shouldn't be there. And in this North Carolina lawsuit, we found there are 1 million extra names on the rolls in North Carolina. You heard that right, 1 million in North Carolina. So even though Judicial Watch's lawsuits have cut the extra names by a significant margin, and there's still too many names on the rolls. And when I say 2.5 million names on the rolls nationally, that is somewhat limited, because our experts, didn't look at every county necessarily, and had a very high standard by which they under which they would add a name as being, quote, inactive or extra onto our list. So arguably it's millions more that you have to be sensitive about in terms of making sure your rolls are clean if you're a state or local election official. So in North Carolina, it's kind of a disaster. About 17% of I've got my other thing here. I'm going to bring it a little closer so I can see it better. About 17% of North Carolina's registrations were inactive, which was the 5th worst highest of the 40 states for which data was available. By way of comparison, the median state inactive rate was 9.6%. So that means you have almost 20% of the rolls, North Carolina, are bad. In 19 North Carolina counties, 20% or more of the registrations were inactive, and in 3 counties, 25% of the registrations were inactive. As of March 2020, North Carolina's own data, as I said, showed nearly 1 million inactive registrations. So I think that exact number was 960,000. A large proportion of these registrations have shown no voting activity for more than 5 years. So that's before the November 2014 election. So these stats are terrible. North Carolina, I think, is the, according to the 2019 analysis we did, they've got 20 states that are close to or above the 100% of their age eligible citizenry. What does that mean? It means that typically, when you look at eligibility within a county or a state, you see who's eligible to vote. citizen voting age population. And typically 75, 80% on a good day is the average registration rate. Some counties, depending on the size or population, you could have counties that go a little bit higher than that. But when you get to 95, frankly 90 plus, but certainly when you have, as we found in too many places, counties where you have more people on the rolls than are living there and eligible to vote, don't you think that's a pretty good indication that they aren't taking reasonable steps to clean up the rolls? And one aspect of this lawsuit, and this is something that you can do within your own jurisdictions, is that the federal law allows you to ask questions about your community's voting list maintenance activities. What are they doing? Are they sending out these notices when people don't show up to vote? Are they removing inactive voters? And they're supposed to respond to you under law, and you can sue if they don't respond. Now, hopefully you don't have to sue, but you can ask. You can go look up the National Voter Registration Act, Section 8. You can ask the questions yourself. So I encourage that individual activism as well. So North Carolina was one of 5 states we had warned for having dirty election rolls in this most recent notice set that we had sent out based on this most recent study in 2019. The other states are California, still major issues in California, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Colorado. Now, I think Colorado, for instance, has vote by mail. How on earth do they have vote by mail with such dirty voting lists is beyond me, which raises a next issue. So I told you at least 2.5 million dirty names on the rolls. Well, the left is what is the left doing? They're using the pretext. Again, it's the pretext because they've always wanted to do this. They're using the pretext of the coronavirus crisis to push for a radical overhaul of our election system in a way that would undermine election integrity in ways that I think would basically upend and blow up the November 2020 presidential elections. They're saying that every state has to have vote by mail and ballot harvesting. Now, when you have vote by mail, it means, and they're under their rubric, is that everyone on the voting list, and maybe people not even on the voting list, the registration list, gets a ballot and gets to send it back in. Well, besides the kind of the practicalities of changing a system like that, or changing or requiring states to change the voting system like that, I just told you the voting lists are a mess across the country. So what they're doing is they're sending your ballots to people who ought not to be on the list at all. They either are dead or moved away. That's an opportunity for voting fraud. And on top of that, they would have the ballot harvesters go through, bang on doors, knock on doors, and collect ballots, which obviously also is an opportunity for not only voter fraud, but voter intimidation. Now, and it would also, because they've got such a crazed hatred of voter ID, this vote by mail system that Pelosi and Hillary Clinton are promoting, the left is just fanatic on this. When you look to see who is pushing this, it's the whole spectrum of the left and far left and their political leadership. And those of us defending it on the right, on the conservative side, I don't even consider it a right-left issue. Because if you're a leftist Democrat trying to take on an incumbent in a corrupt jurisdiction, a voter fraud can keep you from getting traction as well, that's for sure. So, but those of us standing for the rule of law, we're just few and far between. And of course, we're happy to do all the heavy lifting here. There's another group out there run by our friend Christian Adams that does some litigation like this as well. But other than that, nothing. Justice Department is largely AWOL on this. They've done a little bit of work. They intervened in our Kentucky case, for instance, but I'm not aware of anything significant. So when President Trump highlights Judicial Watch's work, as he did this week at a press conference about voter fraud and tying it to voter fraud, he's right to raise this issue. Vote by mail would be a disaster. Because, as I said, when they want to overturn the voter ID laws in 35 states, besides the constitutional issues, the federal government, time, place, manner of elections is set by the state. So states have got to figure out what they want to do. Let's say the contagion is the worst of the worst to come November. What do? Well, you had in Wisconsin a governor, a left-wing governor, the day before the election tried to cancel in-person elections. Thankfully, the Supreme Court of Wisconsin pushed that back. And then the left also went in and tried to change the deadline under which you had to send in your absentee ballot. They would let you send in the ballot after Election Day. Talk about a way to game the system and change the outcome of an election. But that's what the left is trying to do here. And that's what they plan to do for November. So it doesn't even matter if the coronavirus is a serious issue come November or not. They're going to use it as an excuse. You can see the rhetoric. You shouldn't have to, balance your health versus your right to vote. Well, you balance your health when you go out to get groceries. If it's important, you go out and you try to vote in person. The safest and most secure way to vote is in person at a polling place. And once you start having people vote at home, it will blow up the whole process. Voter integrity can't survive national vote by mail the way the left plans it. Now, if you're concerned about voting in person, you have the right in most states to obtain an absentee ballot without no questions asked. Other states, you have to have a reason. And in many states, you've got to send your ID in with that absentee ballot. So if states really are serious or concerned about this, they have to encourage in-person voting in a sensible way that protects the public health. And I'll talk about later about whether this whole social distancing is actually having a real impact on the coronavirus, or is it just make it up as you go along science? But let's pretend it does. People wait online to go into the grocery store. People wait online to go into the voting place. That's not the end of the world. What would be the end of our republic and what would be the end of our country is this vote by mail that would overturn voter ID laws in 35 states. Because as I said, absentee ballots are generally available, and if you don't want to vote in person, you know what you need to do. So Pelosi is going to keep on pushing this in every bill, because they were pushing it before the coronavirus. I mean, it was their number one priority. If you go look up H.R. 1. H.R. 1. So that means that was the first bill by the new left-wing majority in the House. The first bill. And so the coronavirus is just an excuse or a pretext, as I like to say, for this. So all of those names, those 2.5 million names, in theory, would get ballots. And as I said, that just scratches the surface of the number of invalid names on our election rolls. And we just can't let it happen. And the president is correct to be vociferous in opposition to this. And frankly, any American, conservative, Republican, Democrat, left, independent, should oppose vote by mail the way the Democrats are proposing it, the left is proposing it, if they are concerned about their right to vote being stolen. You know what? We're blowing up the economy with this coronavirus shutdown. Our liberties are being suppressed with this coronavirus shutdown. And now the left, in addition, is trying to use this coronavirus shutdown to end our democracy in the sense that it would undermine and blow up any concept of free and fair elections November 20th. So this is a big deal. Our North Carolina lawsuit is just one of many to come. I told you we warned other states. So those other states may face litigation from us. So I encourage you, if you're not already, to support our work. Because there's, as I say, there's no one else doing this sort of election education and litigation the way Judicial Watch is. And I'm proud of our team, and I encourage you to go and look at the lawsuit. Bob Popper is a former Justice Department civil rights Justice Department attorney. We're assisted by, on the outside, by another senior Justice Department former Justice Department civil rights attorney. Because it's no surprise because you know that Judicial Watch does the work the Justice Department is supposed to do. So as the Justice Department dithers, Judicial Watch steps up and has filed another key lawsuit that could result in as many as 1 million names being removed from North Carolina's voting rolls. And I'm hoping the lawsuit ends quickly. I'm hoping that North Carolina says, you know what, Judicial Watch, we screwed up. We know there are these inactive names. We know they're largely gone or shouldn't be on the list. And we're going to take and begin the process to clean up the names. That's all I shouldn't say that's all they need to do, but that would go a long way to correcting the issues that we've highlighted here. They've refused to give us the documents about what they're doing to maintain the lists, which speaks volumes. In our experience, it means they're not doing what they're supposed to do. So another big lie you hear is that, well, they're inactive voters. It means, don't worry, they don't count. Well, they do count. And I get upset when people say they don't count. I tell you what, if you're still an inactive voter on a list and you're, quote, inactive, you can go vote. And to suggest you can't go vote, that suppresses the vote. Just because you haven't voted in 6 years in North Carolina and you still live there, check in with your local election official. Let them know you're still there. But you certainly also have the right to vote. You show up in November and you can vote. So when the politicians tell you to defend their lack of due diligence and basic fiduciary duties to you, that inactive voters are different, they're not different. Because if they're still residents and eligible to vote, they can vote. That's why they have to do the process to figure out if they're still there or not. So, Judicial Watch, again, we appreciate the president highlighting. He was talking about, I think, our California victory the other day. And he sees these dirty voters as voter fraud, evidence of voter fraud. And I tell you, when you look at 1.5 million names or 3.5 million or 2.5 million, whatever the number is, that's a pool from which bad guys can draw from to engage in voter fraud. It makes sense. So the lawsuit was filed just this week, so it will take a while to litigate. And I say, everything's slow, but this process is getting somewhere. Because this litigation, we began this project, I think, in 2012. And since then, we've set new standards in law and have removed, through litigation and threats of litigation, where we're set to remove millions of people from the rolls who shouldn't be there under law. No one's being deprived of their right to vote. In fact, we're protecting your right to vote because we're making it harder for bad guys to steal votes using zombie voters on these rolls. So I appreciate your support of our work that allows us to file this new lawsuit against North Carolina. But you can see, as once again, Judicial Watch is on the cutting edge. The left is using the coronavirus to advance a radical agenda to blow up our elections. And what's Judicial Watch doing? The exact opposite. We're just doing our basic work, not using anything as an excuse, but this is the result of a very detail-oriented, serious legal and investigative process to protect your right to vote, to protect your civil rights. Because if you don't have the right to vote, what else is there? Might as well just check out, because that means you don't have the right to self-government, and it means that politicians can do what they want without fear of being held accountable through the ballot box. So this is pretty darn serious, this issue. Not only obviously cleaning up the voter rolls, but protecting voter ID, standing against and educating people about this mail-in voter push by Nancy Pelosi that's unconstitutional and is designed to overturn the voter rolls, the voter ID rules in 35 states, and basically blow up our elections in November. So this is pretty darn serious stuff, guys. And if you're not paying attention, I encourage you to. If you're not supporting our work, I encourage you to Educate yourself about the issues I'm talking about, of course. Also support our work directly at judicialwatch.org.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.